So tonight, the prophecy talk. So we're going to look now at some of the things happening and see whether this lines up. Now, you've probably noticed there's going to be an event this week called the budget, which everyone's getting terribly upset about because they think they're going to be taxed a lot. And I don't want to get too political, but there are a few things which we have to say which are political and which relate to the things which are happening now. We have a government which has been in power for a while and a growing opposition to this government. I understand that yesterday there was a protest, which I think one or two of you attended, and the protest was basically at what they called the left-wing takeover and the collapse of Christian values in London, in England. And some people said it was far-right, and maybe there were some far-right people there, but I guess there are also some people like Sally and others who were there who maybe not totally far-right, but who just don't approve of what's going on in the world around us. And we have to say that in our society today there is a growing polarization between far right and far left. Just for myself, out of interest, I began my career as in the far left. In fact, at one time I was a card-carrying member of the Communist Party of Great Britain when I was working as a school teacher in Hounslow in West London. Then I became a Christian, and having become a Christian, I then read a lot of communist texts, including Marx and Lenin, and I decided this is a big con. In fact, it's possibly the strong delusion, I thought, which is going to destroy people and lead them astray, because everything they promise, you get the opposite. Promise freedom, promised equality, you get the opposite, you get slavery, and you get oppression. But we see that there is a polarization in our society. And presently we have a government which is not far left, but moderately left. And we have a kind of process which is going on, which is, in fact, connected in some ways to Marxism, what we call cultural Marxism, imposing what I call a kind of woke ideology upon us today. I've said a bit about this in the past. And it's interesting that much of it came to pass when the Tories were in power, so they didn't bring it to power, but it was coming in while it's happening. I mentioned before something called the Gramsci doctrine. Gramsci was an Italian communist, and he decided that the workers' revolution, as in the Communist Manifesto, workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains, was not going to happen in Western societies. There wasn't going to be a revolution in that sense, so what we needed to do was to take control of the institutions, one by one. Take control of education, take control of the media, take control of the civil service, the judiciary, the police, and all these institutions. As you take control of them, gradually you're shaping society, and especially take control of the ones which are going to influence people in the way they think and believe. And I think we've seen that taking place in our society. And we have what we call this cultural Marxism. And a lot of people are influenced by it. And a lot of people are actually beginning to see through it now. And there's a growing kind of rebellion against it. And actually, everything which I wrote about in the last Light for Last Days, which you may have or you can take afterwards, which was actually a critique of this process and also of something to do with the present Labour government, is happening now. And I can see it going from worse to worse. And in some ways, what is happening actually is it's a result also of a nation which is under judgment. Because these things are happening because we've left God out of it. In fact, we've kicked God completely out of it. I quoted from the book of Isaiah, chapter 1, verse 4, where the Lord speaks to his people and says, "Alas, sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity, a brood of evildoers, children who are corrupters. They've forsaken the Lord, they've provoked to anger the Holy One of Israel, and have turned away backward. Why should you be stricken again? You will revolt no more. The whole head is sick, the whole heart is faints. From the sole of the foot even to the head, there is no soundness in it, but wounds and bruises and putrefying sores. They have not been closed or bound or soothed with ointment. Your country is desolate, your cities are burned with fire. Strangers devour your land in your midst. It is desolate, overthrown as by strangers. The city, the daughter of Zion, is left as a booth in the vineyard, as a besieged city. Unless the Lord of hosts had left us a very small remnant, we'd have become like Sodom. we've been made like Gomorrah. And I would propose to you that's a pretty good description of what's happening in our society. And actually, the government itself doesn't have an answer to it. Starmer talked about fixing the foundations. Foundations have been destroyed by revolting against Christianity. And as a result, the things he's trying to fix are actually going to not be fixed and move in the opposite direction. One of the things I've noticed is that everything the government is doing is actually making things worse than they were. They've proposed increased borrowing to fix the hole in the budget, to fund projects to increase make pay increases for the public sector, projects like net zero, which will result in higher taxes, interest rates and mortgages. On tax rises and reforms to businesses, which will give workers more rights to strike so they can't be sacked, which will actually cause many businesses to fold. Article in the Telegraph today saying that about 1,000 small businesses are already closing down because they won't be profitable or able to hire and fire workers, so they're giving up. Which will lead to less work available or less work being done. Also, the wealthy are fleeing the country to avoid high taxes, so now they won't get anything from them. And basically, you're seeing the economy being undermined. And it's going to get worse, I'm afraid, unless something dramatic happens in the other direction. You also see things like they want to reform the rental sector, which probably needs reforming. But the things which they're doing to reform the rental sector are going to make it much more difficult for landlords to operate, to hire out their buildings. They're going to have more and more red tape, more difficult to get rid of tenants if they don't pay. And as a result, what are the landlords going to do? They're going to sell up and not go in for it anymore, which will result in being less properties available for rent. And there may be some rogue landlords, but there are also some decent landlords who will say, well, I can't be bothered with this anymore. So they'll sell up and people won't be able to rent houses anymore. And the prices of what they are will go up. So they get the opposite of what they want. And also going to make the cost of owning your home higher because of the borrowing it's going to put up interest rates and mortgages. We're also seeing crime and disorder increasing. Shoplifting, random violence, intimidation, and a lack of deterrent and no protection from criminals. And as a result, you're going to see society beginning to collapse and poverty and homelessness increasing. And it's going to become more and more difficult for people in this society. We're also seeing a problem, which is that discrimination laws are preventing debate, especially about woke issues, and leading to the outlaw of those holding traditional views and exclusion. Found an example in the Telegraph about the civil service. There are two members of what they call the Gender Critical Sex Equality and Equity Network, known as SEEN. They don't agree with the LGBT agenda. They're saying that they're standing against it. They're being sued by a colleague who claims that their views that transgender people cannot change their sex is discriminatory. So this disagreement has now threatened to spill over into a sacking offence. The aggrieved anonymous colleague bringing the case claimed that the statements made were threatening to transgender people and is demanding that their organisation be shut down and that they should be punished for what they've said. Can you see what's happening there? If you say the wrong thing at work, you may find yourself being punished and penalised and even losing your job. Now, what the people who did the offending, the SEEN group, they actually are preventing the views which most people in this country adhere to. So you're having the views of the majority actually being penalised and the views of the minority being pushed, and if you don't conform, then you get into trouble. And this is leading to a whole way of thinking which is going to cause people like us to be in trouble in society, even for saying these things publicly. And you've got a kind of orthodoxy which is coming through the government, which sits firmly on the side of gender ideology, dodging the idea that sex can change, that gender is all, and that it's transphobic to claim otherwise. Now, behind all this, you're going to see also this collapse of the economy, collapse of trust, and a breakdown of trust in society, breakdown of law and order as well. We've seen the early release of dangerous criminals undermining the forces of law and order, plus a growing crackdown on people for thought crime and hate crime becoming a means of censoring opposition. Just last week, we saw the left-wing Black Lives Matter crowd championing Chris Carber, who was a violent criminal who terrorised black people but was shot by the police. Probably he was wrongly shot by them, but he was engaged at the time in criminal activity. And the police officer was put on trial. He wasn't found guilty of murder, but he's now unable to work and threatened with revenge attacks, putting a 10,000 bounty upon his head to kill him in revenge. There's an article in the Telegraph which said, "No wonder crime is soaring. This week proved that British policing is definitely broken. Morale is hitting rock bottom, with officers prosecuted for simply doing their job. Is it any surprise that order is breaking down? Sergeant Blake was cleared of the murder of gangster Chris Carber this week. A former officer sent me a graph which encapsulated everything that's gone wrong with British policing in recent years. Showed how ex-coppers are jumping ship and leaving the force in 3 times the number that they were 5 years ago. And as the officer pointed out, if these figures are extrapolated in a decade's time, we will not have a police service in this country." That may sound like an overstatement, but the fact is that if you go out to face criminals and thuggies and violent people, and then you do something which gets you into trouble and you lose your job, not a very good prospect. So why not quit and get another job? And there are going to be a lot of people, even people I know, who've done that. And you see that this is a danger for our society. So it's probably a similar situation for teachers, which I used to be one. And as all these things happening, you're going to see the society becoming more and more authoritarian and kind of police-state government cracking down on freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and our freedom to speak out against it. And it's all related to the abandonment of God and Christian values.